Welcome back to the first team. Joe DeLeone, Ryan Roberts. Today we have got another scouting report episode. We're breaking down two of the top corners in the 2024 NFL draft. We're talking Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama. We're talking Nate Wiggins from Clemson. All that coming up on today's show. Ryan, I want to start us off with Kool-Aid McKinstry, who best name in the draft, best nickname in the draft, and
Yep.
also probably the most recognizable name. Played early on in his career at Alabama, developed very nicely. I thought that this has been just a very clean prospect through and through, and one of those guys who just has been super steady, very, very steady.
Yep.
We're going to get into a full breakdown here, but I think that he's got quality starting corner written all over him. What background you got on him?
I mean, he was a high recruit, obviously, like every player that goes to Alabama ever is. And we saw him as a true freshman a lot, Joe. I remember at that point, I believe it was, who do we have? We had Josh Jobe at that point was one of the starting corners for Alabama. And I believe that wasn't the Eli Ricks year, right? That was before that. So
No.
I think because Eli was just last year, right? So as a sophomore, he played with Eli Ricks.
You're right.
Yeah.
I forgot Eli started at LSU. Sorry.
But I remember Josh Jobe was like super inconsistent the year before. So there was a point in the season where they were like, we need to kind of make the move to Kool-Aid McKinstry, who was a true freshman at the time. And it worked out pretty well. I thought he played very well as a freshman for, being a obviously a young cat playing in the SEC, and then moved over to his sophomore year where he was an all SEC player, also one of the best punt returners in all of college football. And I mean, I think that profile is pretty easy to see, right? I mean, from a recruiting ranking perspective to where we are now, I mean, 6'1", 195 pounds. He has obviously the great athleticism, which is why he was such a highly touted recruit. And it shouldn't be any surprise, man, because Nick Saban is one of the best cornerback developers in all of college football and has been his entire career. I mean, we'll talk about obviously what he's done in Alabama with the Drake Kirkpatricks and the Minka Fitzpatricks and, all these great corners, the D Milners of the world. He's had a lot of first round corners in his time at Alabama. But also even before that, during his time at LSU, when they were arguably DBU at that point, I mean, he has always been a really good cornerback developer, and this is the latest as far as also, I mean, Alabama has two of them, and Tyrion Arnold as well. So, I mean, McKinstry though is definitely a little bit of the bigger name, the sexy name coming into the season, and obviously that's due to his recruiting background and the fact that he's been playing for 3 years now.
Yeah, and I don't know if McKinstry ends up being the first corner taken, but I think that one thing that needs to be illustrated early on, I don't think that should be a knock on Kool-Aid. I think that there's the guy that we're going to talk about, I think has a little bit more of like a wow factor in some of his physical traits. But with Kool-Aid, as I said a second ago, he very like just epitomizes the word well-rounded. Very good athlete, very clean technique, great hips, closes down really easily, stays with guys really easily. Love his, his ability to react to what's going on in front of him. I don't know why, but it kind of gives me like Pat Surtain vibes in the sense that just very, very well-rounded. You know what you're getting. He might not be the first corner off the board, but you draft him early and you're getting a starting corner that's going to play at a very high level. I just like everything that Kool-Aid McKinstry brings to the table.
Yep.
And it's one of those players who I won't feel bad if my team takes him. Like, I'll just be like, okay, I just got a really good starting defensive player.
Yeah, he's kind of an interesting player for me because I think we see him pretty similarly, but like I see a couple different things that make me worried, one, but also bring a high floor two. And first and foremost, his name's JaQuincy, not Kool-Aid, but it's another conversation for another day. I do like the Kool-Aid nickname though; it's pretty neat. And he's only 21 years old. He's not going to turn 22 until September of his rookie year, so he's still a young cat, obviously. Joe, here's the thing. He brings a high floor to the table because he's been playing at Alabama under Nick Saban in the SEC for 3 years. That brings a high floor because he's seen a lot of great wide receivers. He's been working one of the best cornerback developers of our generation. I mean, he's been doing obviously tremendous things at Alabama. I believe, though, in my opinion, there's still a lot of upside here for what Kool-Aid can be. I don't think that he's near his ceiling because I look at that kid and I say 6'1", 195 pounds. I guarantee he runs right around 4.4 flat. Like he might be a 4.38 type of dude, man. Like he can run. He is a twitched up athlete. that can turn around with pretty much anyone. I mean, people just don't really uncover deep on him just from pure athleticism. But technically speaking, there's still some things that he can get better at. I still think there's some false
Yeah.
steps in his
Yeah.
I think there's some false steps in his back pedal and kind of changing direction. And I think he makes things hard for himself at times, but it ends up not hurting him as much at Alabama because he's such a good athlete. It's like a false step out of his break, but he's able to cover up that ground because he's so explosive and so athletic. So this kid is going to be a first round corner. There's no doubt about it. He's going to get drafted high. I wouldn't be shocked if he was the first corner off the board. I personally would not draft him first out of this cornerback group. That's just me, though. But I think that he brings a high floor in the sense that you're at least going to get a solid player because he plays at Alabama. He's been developed by the best. But I think that I would argue, it's my opinion, that he's probably top 2-ish players at the cornerback position in 2024 as far as upside. I mean, if he hits his upside, he could be a Pro Bowl level player. He's got that type of
Yeah.
he's got that type of upside to him. He's still developing from great athlete to great football player, in my opinion. I don't think he's quite there yet, but he has the
Right.
building blocks that a defensive back coach is going to love at the next level.
Right. That's kind of like where I'm at, where I watch him and there's nothing about him that I'm like, wow, this is ridiculous. Like, this is all pro. This is a guy who's going to do something crazy. That's kind of where I'm getting at here with these, just very well rounded. Like, he does everything.
You're talking about like
He checks
athletically, or you're talking about from a technical perspective as well?
Technical perspective and just general impact. Like, he does everything at a plus level, but there's not necessarily something I look at him and I go like, this is elite. And you're talking about his athleticism. It does sneak up on you a little bit on how really, really, truly how quick he is. I think that he runs a faster 40 time like you're talking about than we anticipate. But it all just comes back down to the fact that there's probably going to be one or two other guys that could get drafted ahead of him because teams get excited about various traits that are brought to the table of other guys. But again, he feels like, as we're talking about here, with one of the higher floors, which tends to be pretty consistent with these Alabama defensive backs. That's why I've got like a mid to late first round grade on him. Could see him going earlier, could see him finding his way in the top 10 by a team that's just like, you know what? We don't want to get burned by anybody else. We just want to get a consistent, steady pick. Or another example of where he could end up going with one of these teams that has 2 early first round picks. He also feels like a candidate for that.
Yeah. I think that you are spot on there. And I would say for me, I have a late first on him because I grade in a vacuum. Like, I'm not putting positional value into the conversation. We know that cornerbacks in today's world are going to get pushed up the board because you need good cornerbacks in today's league. And he could be a good cornerback, obviously. The reservations I have are all fixable things, like false steps out of transitioning out of your pedal. That's the thing you could teach, right? Being a little bit more proactive in press, that is something that you could teach. You can teach press tech. Everything that I want to see from Kool-Aid is teachable, right? There's no unteachable thing that I look at and say, like, that kid doesn't have that. He's athletically checks boxes, like you said. I think that he kind of hits all the thresholds you're going to want. I would say for this cornerback class, like this time last year, Joe, the Devin Witherspoon rise was kind of happening, right? And by the time we got to the draft day, it was like Devin Witherspoon's going to be the first corner off the board. Like, everyone knew it, like it was going to happen. I don't necessarily see that this year as far as a guy that I would say is going to definitely make that rise. I think that we're going to see 2 to 3 corners at the top of this class that people are going to like in different orders. Like, I think that from an NFL perspective, people are going to have, there's not going to be a consensus cornerback one this year. There's not going to be a guy that's like slam dunk, that's a top 10 pick, and everybody else is right behind him. I think that we have different flavors in this cornerback class. I know we're going to talk about Nate Wiggins next, obviously, but Kool-Aid McKinstry is much different than Nate Wiggins, who is also much different than Kalen King, who is much different than Quinyon Mitchell, right? Like, there's a lot of corners in this class that I like, but it's really going to depend on what your flavor is as a organization, because there are different types of traits and different types of corners in this year class, which is why it's going to be a fun debate working down the stretch.
And I also, just to round that out, I think there's a possibility that we see 5 corners that go in the first round. I think that there's certainly a capability for that to happen, because if you look at some of these other position groups, because I did a mock draft the other day, and if you look at these other position groups, it really kind of does thin out towards the back end of the first because I think a lot of tackles go, which really impacts what teams are looking for. That all these teams need offensive linemen,
Yes.
a couple interior offensive linemen can come off the board, and then we come back around and there's guys that are good football players like
Yeah.
Cooper DeJean and
Mhm.
Terrion Arnold and Kalen King that I think could get selected in this back half of the first round.
I was looking at my mock draft real quick. So I had 2, 3, 4. I think I had like 6. We had 4. Sorry, I'm stalling for a second here to make sure that I don't miss 5. I had 5 corners. No, I had 6 corners. I had 7 corners in the first round, Joe. 7
Wow.
cornerbacks in the 2024, my first round mock draft.
I think that's possible. I
Think
think that's really possible. There's a
things
lot of good players.
Yeah, and things will obviously change, and it could change that maybe I'm low on how many corners could go in the first round, or it could be maybe I'm a little bit high right now. But we know that the NFL goes gaga for talented corners, which there's a lot of in this year's draft. It's pretty deep, man. Like for the most part, it's a pretty deep cornerback class. And I think that there might be a demand in the first round this year for cornerbacks in general.
You also got to take into account this year, there's not really any running backs that are going to be in the first round
No.
conversation. There's not really any linebackers in the first round conversation. And there's really maybe 2 defensive tackles that are in the first round convo. So
Yeah.
the positional value for these other positions that might get selected in the back end of the first, I think that inevitably any corner with a early to mid second round grade is probably going to get picked somewhere on day one.
Could very well could be
Tends,
because everybody's
tends to happen a lot.
everyone's going to get pushed up the board, man. The positions of value in today's game, quarterback's always going to be one. Offensive tackles also always going to be another. Pass rushers, sometimes wide receivers now, and then corners are kind of that next wave of positions that tend to get pushed up a little bit. I agree.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. Bet online, where the game starts.